Forget the endless feasts of legend. For a medieval knight, the daily reality was not roasted boar, but bland pottage and rock-hard bread. Their diet was a constant, brutal battle for survival. In this video, we will sink our teeth into the shocking truth about what a knight actually ate, from the monotonous meals at his castle to the disgusting rations on campaign and the ultimate horrors of a siege. Part 1. The Peacetime Plate, a diet of status and salt. Back at his own castle, a knight's diet was defined by two things: his social status and the urgent need for preservation. First, the foundation of every meal, bread. But not all bread was created equal. The quality of your bread was a direct reflection of your place in the world. A knight as a lord would eat fine white bread made from sifted wheat flour known as manchet. It was a soft, fluffy status symbol. His peasants, meanwhile, would be eating dense, dark loaves made from rye or barley, often mixed with peas or beans. Next, protein. While the knight had more access to meat than anyone else, the concept of a fresh steak was a rare luxury. The vast majority of meat was preserved to last through the long winter months. This meant it was heavily salted, smoked, or pickled. Imagine eating pork that had been cured in a barrel of salt for months. It was tough, intensely salty, and had to be soaked for hours before it was even remotely palatable. The same went for fish, which was often dried until it was as hard as a piece of wood. The centerpiece of many daily meals was a dish called pottage. This was a thick, constantly evolving stew. A large cauldron would simmer over the fire for days on end. Into it went anything and everything. Grains like barley and oats, vegetables from the garden like onions, leeks, and cabbage, and any leftover scraps of meat or bone. It was a nutritious, calorie-dense sludge, but often a bland and monotonous one. And to drink, not water. Water from wells and rivers was often contaminated and a source of disease. The true drink of the Middle Ages was ale. It was drunk by everyone, from children to knights. It was a crucial source of calories, and the brewing process killed most harmful bacteria. But this wasn't the crisp, refreshing beer you know today. It was often thick, cloudy, and low in alcohol, essentially a form of liquid bread. Fine wine from France was a luxury reserved for the high table, another way to display wealth and power. Part 2. The Campaign Trail, a diet of rocks and rot. If the peacetime diet was monotonous, the diet on a military campaign was an exercise in pure misery. Feeding an army on the move was a logistical nightmare. All food had to be durable, portable, and resistant to rot. The undisputed king of campaign food was a notorious item known as hardtack or biscuit. This was a simple mixture of flour, water, and sometimes salt-baked 2, 3, or even 4 times until it was completely devoid of moisture. The result was a cracker as hard as a rock. It was incredibly durable and could last for years, but it was almost inedible. Soldiers would have to soak it in ale, wine, or broth for a long time just to soften it enough to chew. And even then they had to be careful. These biscuits were famously infested with weevils and maggots. Experienced soldiers had a grim saying: "It's better to eat your hardtack in the dark." For protein, the knight relied on the same preserved foods as at-home barrels of salted pork and dried fish. But as the campaign dragged on, supplies would dwindle. Foraging became essential. Knights and their men would eat whatever they could find: wild berries, roots, nuts, and any small game they could catch. This was not a choice, it was survival. But all of this pales in comparison to the desperate measures knights resorted to during a siege. When the castle gates were locked and the food ran out entirely, the reality is more gruesome than you can imagine, and we will reveal that now. Part 3. The Siege Diet, the ultimate horror. A siege was a waiting game, a battle of starvation. When the last of the grain and salted meat was gone, the grim countdown began. First, the castle's inhabitants would turn to the unthinkables. They would eat the horses, starting with the peasants' workhorses and ending tragically with their own priceless warhorses. They would hunt and eat every rat, mouse, and stray cat within the castle walls. They would boil leather from belts, shields, and saddles into a gelatinous slime to extract any last bit of nutrition. But when even the leather was gone, the final most terrible taboo was broken cannibalism. This is not a fantasy. It is a documented historical horror. During the First Crusade at the brutal siege of Ma'ara in 1098, the starving Crusader army faced a terrible choice. The chronicler Radulf of Caen wrote grimly, "In Ma'ara, our troops boiled pagan adults in cooking pots. They impaled children on spits and devoured them grilled." While this is an extreme example, the desperation it represents was a very real threat in any prolonged siege. The knight, the pious champion of Christendom, could be forced by starvation to commit the most profound of sins, a psychological trauma that would haunt him forever, even if he survived the siege itself. So the brutal reality of a knight's diet was a world away from the banquet tables of legend. It was a diet dictated by status preservation and all too often sheer desperation. For every night of feasting, there were months of bland, pottage, rock-hard biscuits and intensely salty meat. A knight's body was a weapon and food was the fuel. But that fuel was often crude, unappetizing, and barely enough to keep the machine of war running. They endured it all because they had to. Their resilience was perhaps their most impressive quality. This journey to uncover the gritty, uncomfortable truths of the past is our core mission. If you believe these real stories are more fascinating than any fantasy, hitting the like button is the best way to show your support. And if you're hungry for more history that they don't teach you in school, then subscribe to The Knight's Journey and ring the notification bell, because sometimes to understand a hero, you first have to understand their hunger.